Hello,
Recording in
everyone.
progress.
Yay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Aurelio Muraca. I'm the Technology Program Coordinator here at the Danbury Library. And this is night 2 of our Western Connecticut UFO Conference for 2025. And tonight we're going to actually take a different sort of direction that we've done in our past UFO conferences with local Danbury legend Malcom Tent, who was the proprietor of a longstanding what would you say, Malcolm? What would you call a trash American style? A
Uh,
boutique, post, punk rock boutique and collectible or record shop.
Record shop slash psycho thrift store slash cultural hub for the underground in Western Connecticut and Eastern New York and the entire known universe.
Awesome. And on behalf of the Friends of the Danbury Library, we welcome you to night 2. And again, but I'm gonna stop talking. I'm gonna let you talk, Malcolm. So, sir, you have the con.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Aurelio, for inviting me onto this fine,
Pleasure.
festive occasion. Yeah, I think your introduction summed it up fairly well. I'm well known for being a punk rock capitalist, a record store owner, running a record label, playing in bands, and just generally doing the DIY lifestyle 24/7. I did Trash American Style for 21 years as a brick and mortar record store. That's how I met everybody in Connecticut and many, many people all throughout the world. You stand behind the record counter of a really cool record store, you open the front door, and you never know who's going to walk in. So I had many, many, many great customers. I had lots of really good employees, most of whom I'm still in touch with to some degree or another. And hence my connection to Danbury, Connecticut, because the store was in Danbury. And even though I currently live in North Carolina, my heart still beats in Western Connecticut. Fairfield County, Putnam County, New York gets an honorable mention. What do you want? New Milford, Brookfield, Newtown, New Fairfield, Old Fairfield. I moved to Connecticut and stayed there for 38 years, and it was a really good run. And you can take the boy out of Connecticut, but you can't take the Connecticut out of the boy, even though I'm in North Carolina right now. So that's why I'm here at the Danbury UFO Conference. And the secondary reason might be that I have actually had one, I wouldn't even call it a close encounter. It was probably kind of a distant encounter, but an encounter nonetheless. And I have very, I think, interesting stories about two people, not one, but two people who had very close encounters. So I can relate their stories to you via this medium. I guess I'm the medium, you could say. So I'll start off with my story, but not until I take a good swig of this wonderful, delicious hickory tap water. Mm-mm-mm. For years and years and years, I drank Danbury tap water, which we all know is fortified by mercury, lead, cadmium, and all kinds of wonderful heavy metals from the hatting industry. Now I drink hickory tap water, which is fortified with all kinds of great polyurethane, shellac, uh, wood tanning agents, and God only knows what else from the furniture industry. So it's got a different bouquet than Danbury water did. And I might be mad as a furniture maker by the time this is all over. But I digress. My story, distant encounter. So it was 1995. I was taking a cross-country train trip via Amtrak. I departed Brewster, New York, took the train to New York City, and then from there took the train to Chicago, and from there to San Francisco, and then traced my steps back to Danbury. It was a really wonderful trip. It's like if you really want to see America, I recommend the train highly because it doesn't follow, for the most part, the interstate highway routes. It goes like way into the interior of the country and way out in the hinterlands. And most of the stops on the trains were for towns that were active a century ago and maybe aren't so much now. So you get to go through this incredible expanse of the USA, and all your whistle stops are in these dinky little towns, like one traffic light towns. So you see real America, like real deep, legit USA. And it's just wonderful. Now, mind you, if you're going to try to be somewhere on a deadline, or if you have to be somewhere by a certain amount of time, don't go Amtrak. They will not get you there on time. That is a stone cold guarantee. If you want to take a nice leisurely amble across the USA and see parts that you cannot see from the interstate highway, go Amtrak. And it's because I was on an Amtrak train going through some really bizarre hinterland of Utah that I have my semi close encounter of probably the ninth or 10th kind. But I saw it. It was there. I know what it, well, I don't know what it was, but I know I saw it, and it was there. And that's the end of the story. But what was it? I'll tell you in a second. I just love that polyurethane so much. So we're heading back east. And as I mentioned, we were going through Utah, and it was middle of the day. And this was like the real long, low flatlands of Utah. I don't know if it was actually desert or not, but it might have been salt flats. It was a very huge, vast expanse of flatland. And it was hot, and it was sunny, and it was bright. And I, of course, was sitting by the window, because the window seats where all the action is. And I'm just gazing out, watching Utah roll by for what seemed like hours and hours and hours and hours. And we sort of came up on this object. It was probably in, like, when you've got that much expanse, it's kind of hard to gauge distances. You know, when you're in Connecticut or a place with rolling land or hills, you can pretty much gauge from here to there based on the topography, you know, in the background. But in a place like Utah, where it's completely flat, it's really hard to measure distances, I think. But this thing was probably about, let's say, like a quarter mile away. It was not far away at all. It was a long silver object. It was fatter than a cigar, but skinnier than a blimp. And I honestly couldn't tell you how big it was, but it was pretty sizable. It was probably, I would guess, 15, 20 feet long, and maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, and cylindrical. And it was just hovering over the ground. It was like very clearly and very distinctly not on the ground. It was definitely space between the ground and this thing. If I had to guess, maybe 15, 20 feet. And it was just hovering. It didn't have any moorings. It didn't have any pedestal or any kind of support or anything. There were no wings, no engine, nothing attached to the outside of this thing. And it was just hovering perfectly still in this one spot, maybe about a quarter mile away. And the train wasn't going that fast. It took some time to pass it. We just went right by it, and I just looked at this thing the whole time, maybe 10, 15 minutes. It did not move. I mean, I couldn't tell if it made any noise or not, because the windows of the train were sealed. But it did not move, and I couldn't hear anything through the window. You know, you can hear like when the train puts its brakes on, or you can hear the track noise. You can hear stuff when you're in the train, but I didn't hear anything at all coming from this object. But it was cylindrical, silver, it was shiny, perfectly stationary, and definitely not attached to the ground in any way. And I just sort of watched it go by for however long it took. And that was the end of that. But I saw it. I don't know what it is. I don't know what kind of purpose it served. So therefore, I think it qualifies as unidentified. Maybe not a flying object, but certainly a hovering object. And you would think that if it was hovering, it probably had the ability to fly. So I don't know. If anybody out there has any ideas as to what this thing might have been, I'm sure we would entertain suggestions. We have Aurelio acting as the MC and the moderator here.
If you have any questions, please put it in the chat. Again, everyone, Malcolm is happy to take on questions during his presentation. Just to let you know, Malcolm, since I've been in, know a lot about UFO and UFO history and the shapes and everything like that, what you've described is actually a pretty common and classic UFO
Mm,
that's seen quite often. There's usually like the orbs, the silver discs, but one of the most common is like what you said, fatter than a cigar, not as fat, not as round as a blimp, but that's a very common shape that's seen often, and also the dimensions that you've given, and I know it's hard given the typography and nothing in the distance to sort of give you reference, but that's pretty accurate in terms of other eyewitness accounts. So I just want to say that you've spotted something that's been seen by others.
interesting. Very interesting. I'm glad I wasn't just hallucinating or making it up. But
No,
it's like I've read a lot of accounts from people who have seen UFOs, and the one thing that is universal is everybody knows what they saw. They like, and I appreciate that feeling very greatly. I wasn't asleep, I wasn't dreaming, I wasn't tripping, dude. I was just sitting in my seat on the train, and it was there. I saw it, period. It's just like just as simple as seeing an airplane or a balloon or a car driving down the road. It was just a thing that was there. And it was, I never forgot it. Obviously, that was back in 1995, and here I am able to recall it very vividly and very clearly as to what it was. Of course, I would love to know what it was. I mean, has anybody ever ventured a guess as to what such an object might be?
it's obviously something off-world. It could be, maybe there's speculation, but of course, it's not proven that it could be some sort of high-tech, next generation military concept, plane or anything, but what you've seen has been seen for decades. And what you've seen is something that we do not have at all as part
Right.
of our aerospace or military inventory, and probably not any other countries. So what you
Right.
saw was probably pretty much a legitimate unidentified object. Although it's not flying, it's still considered something that's unknown. I want to ask, did anyone else on the train see it? Did you have like any sort of interaction with any of the other passengers saying, "What the heck is that?"
No, which is interesting because I was in my seat, and if anybody's ever traveled by train, you know that you've got the cars where everybody sits and sleeps at night, and they've also got the club car where you can go and congregate with all the other passengers and hang out, get food and drink, and they have these really huge panoramic all glass sides. And I really wish I'd been in the club car when we came by this thing, because then I would have been with other people and would have had like a super clear view of this thing. So that was kind of a chance happenstance where I wasn't able to get the optimal experience watching this thing. But as I recall, I was the only one there. There wasn't anybody next to me, and I don't remember anybody else around me at the time. So I'm the only one.
Oh, no.
Oh,
If
no,
anyone
you
has
all.
any questions, feel free to type it in the chat. Otherwise, you can keep going, Malcolm.
All right. Well, that was story number one. That was my personal firsthand account of something. This one is a secondhand account. And anybody who went to Trash American Style will probably remember that it was co-owned by myself and my business partner, Kathy. The way it broke down at the store was basically I handled the music, she handled the piercing jewelry and the clothes and the hippie stuff and all that. And so I met Kathy in 1985. We were both living in Florida at the time, and we both hated Florida at the time. And her idea was to bust out of Florida and move to Connecticut and open up a record store. So that's how Trash American Style came about. So, at that time we lived together and, we're very close. And when we first moved to Connecticut, we were living up in Sherman at her parents' house. So if you're from Danbury, you probably know Sherman. If you don't, I'll give you a very basic geographical lesson. You've got Danbury, you go north, and you have New Milford, and you go further north, and you have Sherman. So if you were to drive on Route 7 out of Danbury and just go straight up for like half hour, 45 minutes, you'll go through New Milford and eventually come to Sherman. And Sherman is very rural. To this day, it's very rural. It's not very developed. It's quiet. It's pastoral. It's bucolic. It's really nice up there. You're really in the foothills of the Berkshires, and it's very pretty and it's very calm. And that's where Kathy grew up. She grew up in Sherman on a house right on the New York state line. Like if you cross over, like her backyard was the New York state line. And if you crossed over there, you were in, I think, Putnam County, I believe it was, Putnam or Dutchess. I'm not exactly sure which, but you were in, I'm pretty sure it's Putnam County by Patterson, Carmel, Brewster, and all that. So lots of cow pastures. There's a really huge working farm away right around where she grew up. And her main road from her house that led down to Route 39, which led down to Route 7, went down this very steep hill. And then, of course, the hill went back up again. So when you're at the top of her hill, you have a great commanding view of all of the countryside. You see all the other hilltops, you see everything there is to see. So I have a very clear visual of where she was when she saw what she saw and where she experienced what she experienced. So this took place, I'm going to have to guess 1984, maybe 1985. It was before she moved to Florida, which was sometime in 1985. So pre-Florida, we're talking early 80s. So 84, 85. So as quiet and undeveloped as Sherman is now, you can imagine it was even more so back then. There were fewer houses, fewer structures of any sort, less traffic, super duper quiet. And she told me that one night she was going from her house to somewhere, like driving somewhere to Danbury or New Milford or whatever, because there's nothing to do in Sherman. There's nothing. Zero, zilch. You have to get out of Sherman for anything to happen. So she was in her car. And if I remember correctly now some of the details have gotten fuzzy over the years. But if I recall, she was by herself and she was driving her car. And she was at the top of the hill going from her house down into the valley when she noticed that on one of the other hilltops on the other side of the valley, there was a large structure with lots of lights. Now, having grown up in Sherman, she knew for a fact that there, and this is nighttime, I should mention too. She's there at nighttime, and she sees this large structure with lights where normally there's an empty hilltop, you know. It was silent. She couldn't tell what it was. Was it a house? Was it a construction site. It was like, what was this thing that's all of a sudden on the hilltop that was never there before? So she decided to drive up there and take a look. So she drove down into the valley and then back up to the hill. And when she started going up the hill, there was a pickup truck stopped dead in the middle of the road, blocking the road. And there were two guys standing outside of the pickup truck, looking up at this thing, completely silent, completely motionless, did not respond to anything she said. Because she was like, hey, what's going on? What are you doing here? They just stood there. They did not acknowledge her. They did not acknowledge anything. They're just standing there staring at this thing on the hilltop. And even though she was a lot closer, she still couldn't tell what it was, other than it was a large structure of some sort with lots of lights. So by now, she is creeped out, spooked, scared. She got in her car and turned around and just drove back and never looked back. Of course, she went to wherever she was going that night, came home later that night, and everything was back to normal. Whatever that structure was, it was gone. Whoever the creepazoids were in the pickup truck, they were gone. It was totally back to normal. And the next day, if I recall correctly, she drove up there to see what was this thing. And it was just nothing there. Nothing. Like there had never been anything there. But it was the same deal as always. She saw very plainly with her own two eyes that there was something there. It was big, it had lots of lights, and there are these two guys on the road leading up to it, just kind of zombified, staring at it. And in fact, when I moved to Sherman, because I lived with her parents for a little while when I first came up to Connecticut, she made a point of taking me to that hilltop to show me where it was, whatever it was. And by that time, someone had started building a house there. So they had dug out a foundation and were laying concrete. So, if there had been any evidence at all, who knows? Somebody's since built a house on top of it. But she really was very clear that she wanted me to see this spot where this very strange, unidentified object was. So if anybody knows about a UFO story from 84-ish in Sherman and can shed some light on this, I'd like to hear it, because she was very, very compelling and very, very certain of what she saw and what she experienced.
If anybody has anything they would like to ask Malcolm, please put it in the chat. I'll be happy to relay it to him. But during that time period, that's when the whole Hudson Valley sightings was happening in the area, Malcolm. So I'm curious to know, was it hovering? Was it like on the ground, or you can't, you don't know because of, where she was or anything like that? And like, it's very curious that she said it's like a structure with lots of lights, and that's what the flying boomerang was like.
Well, I heard something there for a second.
Sorry about that. That was a PA announcement, but the
Flying boomerang.
it's a flying, pretty much the flying boomerang, the V-shaped, as big as Danbury High School, flying over, you know, Danbury, New York, Brewster, all that area, going up and down the Hudson Valley, treetop level, not making a sound, looking like the size of Danbury High School. It was that big. That was seen by tens of thousands of people over the course of years. So I'm curious if that could be part of that night. If she can let us know, maybe the night, the day what time and everything, maybe I can do some research into clarifying if that was a night where there was a mass sighting.
Yeah, I haven't been in touch with her in years. I don't even know where to find her anymore. But the impression I got was that it was actually on the ground. I don't remember her saying specifically that it was hovering, or she didn't see it move. That was one of the key things, was that it was just this thing that was there. And even with, her trying to go up there and see what it was, she never once described any kind of motion on it. It was just there and apparently on the ground.
If this has anything to do with the whole Hudson Valley, that's obviously something that's actually would be considered new because the object was never seen on the ground. It's usually was hovering, flying over, towns. I-84 was a mass sighting. People, stopped on 84 by the state trooper barracks and actually witnessing this gigantic craft and asking the state troopers what it is, and the state troopers are like, we have no idea what it is. So,
Mhm.
yeah, a question. I saw a orange orb around 1984 in Danbury by the high school, which I thought was light reflections until I learned about the Hudson Valley lights. So there you go. It might be, part of that whole mass sighting. So, if we ever get in touch with her, if you find it, please ask.
Yeah, totally, totally. I'll pick her brain about it. Okay, my third story relates to a guy who used to come into my store a lot. I had a lot of regulars. This guy was a regular. And I've racked my brain trying to remember what his name was. I cannot remember his name.
You can give them an alias.
Um, Mr. X. So Mr. X would come into my store a lot, and he was very heavy into UFO culture. In fact, he told us that he was in regular touch with the occupants of UFOs, and that he communicated with them, and they were landing in the Putnam County area around Brewster. There was a certain field that they frequented, and he would go there to meet them. Of course, I'm very skeptical about this because, people can say anything. They'll, make stuff up, or, whatever. You're in the community, you know how it goes. There's legitimacy and there's craziness. So I just didn't really give this guy much thought. But one day he came in and said, "Well, they're landing next week, and I'm going to go with them." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And he said, "Well, no, I'm serious. I'm going to be leaving here next week. I'm going to meet them in the field, and I'm leaving." I'm like, "Well, good luck." He came in a little bit less than a week later and said, "Well, just wanted to come by and say goodbye. Tomorrow's the big day. I'm going to meet them. You can come with me if you want." And I was like, on the one hand, I was really curious because what if this guy is telling the truth? But on the other hand, I don't really want to leave here. I kind of like it here. I got a good thing going here on Mill Plain Road. It's a fun punk rock existence I'm having. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not really in the mood to fly off in a UFO. So I said, "No, thank you. I'm just going to stay right here, and mazel tov to you." And I never saw him again. What does that mean? I don't know, but he went off to meet them, and that was it. He was gone.
Do you think that you've heard, did anybody else in the store know him and could say, like, maybe he had some issues, or maybe he had to move because of this, and he's just using this sort of story to sort of, like, cover some sort of, you know trying to impress you, or trying to impress the folks around, trash American style, to sort of like be like, hey, I'm the UFO sort of, like, guy here, and I'm meeting the Venusians over here. We're gonna go off to Altar for, you never know. You never know.
Utterly, utterly imponderable. I couldn't say. I mean, like I said, he was a regular, so he probably talked to some of the people who worked for me or other customers. He had good taste in music. I remember that. It's just the fact that he never came back. That's
What happened to his
that's really made
records?
it stick in my mind after all this time, you know?
Did he take his records with him?
I don't know. I really don't know. It would have been really wild if I'd gotten a call to visit his estate and, he left everything behind. I really don't know. I just thought that was an interesting postscript to the story.
Anything else you can tell us, Malcolm? I know you have a lot of great stories. Maybe they're not, UFO related. Maybe they're just sort of like interesting anecdotes that you could share with us.
Oh man, I could go on for as long as you wanted, really. I wouldn't even know where to start.
Actually, yeah, keep that in mind. We have a question
All right,
from Dan. He
bring on
said,
the questions. Who's
"What
got
did what did Mr. X say about the conversations with the ETs?" That's a great question. What did he say about those conversations?
I don't recall. Well, actually, you're making me think now. You're kind of making me remember.
That's
And you're
good,
also,
though.
what's that?
Good,
Well,
kind of
you're jogging
jogging
my
your memory.
memory. You're making me remember another guy. I'd clean forgot about this guy. There was a guy. I've released stuff on my record label, which is a great time to plug my record label, TPOS, which I've been running since 1984. There's a guy on my label. His name is Nelson Slater. Nelson Slater, his terrestrial base was Cincinnati, Ohio. His biggest claim to fame was that he was Lou Reed's college roommate in the early 1960s. And allegedly, he's the guy who supplied the guitar to Lou Reed when Lou Reed went to jam with Sterling Morrison and later formed the Velvet Underground. So Nelson Slater was like right there at the very, very beginning of the Velvet Underground, you could say. And later on, Lou Reed produced an album for him that came out on RCA. And then later, Nelson Slater became like a total DIY artist and musician. To the day he died, Nelson Slater would tell anybody and anybody who would listen or knew that he was in direct contact with extraterrestrials, that he was there to bring a message of goodwill and a message of hope that humanity is poised on the brink of a great rebirth and a new golden age of enlightenment and reason. And he could actually go around and point out hot spots where there was like energetic activity or extraterrestrial activity or what have you. But he was always absolutely adamant that he was there to bear this message from the extraterrestrials. Oddly enough, I don't think he ever wrote songs about it or sang about it. Like it didn't, this message was never in his music, but during interviews and in the liner notes for the album I put out, he absolutely insisted that he talk about that and get this message across. So y'all might want to look him up. Nelson Slater, Slater. He was very clear about the message that he had. The guy that came to my store,
Mr. X.
Mr. X, I don't specifically remember him talking about the hot topics, such as it were. Mainly because, it was kind of difficult at the store because I was always busy and multitasking, and there was always, four people at once trying to get my attention, the phone ringing, and it was kind of hard sometimes to devote one-on-one time to somebody, especially this guy. I'll admit I gave him kind of short shrift because like I didn't really want to hear his UFO rap. I was too busy trying to pay the rent for the day. But I always circle back to the fact that he never came back. I never saw the guy again. That's what really kind of popped my cork, making me think, did they take him away? I don't know. It was very strange.
Have you ever tried to look him up on social media?
If I could remember his name, that would make it a lot easier. I want to say that he was involved with radio. So many of the details, it's like I'm just getting into speculation and just trying to flog my memory right now. I don't want to get too heavy into the the gray, half-remembered aspects of the story. You know, that's just what I can
Difference,
report
but the
firsthand.
difference between Mr. X and say Nelson is palpable because you're like, okay, Mr. X can be one of these folks who may or may, there's a lot of like this, he could be making this stuff up. But Nelson was very sort of, sincere and
Yeah,
attitude.
very.
And he would just bring it up at certain times where it's like, this is serious. I'm not like backing down, in terms of like, hey, we're doing our music, I'm doing this, very professional. And then he's like, oh yeah, by the way, over here, if you go to this section of Manhattan, this is where people were taken or whatever is a high energy spot or something like that.
Yeah, or a portal, like he knew where certain portals were and whatnot. Um, you know, I can't say I was best friends with the guy or I knew him inside out, but he always struck me as being a sane, rational guy. He wasn't a raving lunatic. He wasn't foaming at the mouth. His music was kind of weird and unusual, but you could sit there and have a cup of coffee with him and, you know, talk whatever you wanted to. But there was always this subtext about how he was this emissary. And, that reminds me in turn of the great Sun Ra. I don't know if people know who Sun Ra is. Does anybody out there know who Sun Ra is? Aurelio, do you know about Sun Ra?
I do.
Okay. Well, Sun Ra, for those who don't know about Sun Ra was born Herman Poole Blount, I believe in the 1920s in Birmingham, Alabama. And it's kind of the same deal. He was very lucid, adamant, and clear about the fact that sometime, I think in the 1930s, maybe 1940s, he had a direct close encounter of the first kind where he had direct communication with aliens. And he never wavered from that until the day he died. And he lived to be an old guy. He told the story many times in interviews, he wrote about it. He was a subject of much derision over it when he was a college student in Birmingham in the 30s or 40s. But it's kind of the same deal. He never once varied from his story or equivocated or apologized or anything. And in fact, he used that encounter as the foundation for his entire career in music. He invented a school of thought called Afrofuturism, in which he tried to tie together the strains of ancient Africa, the modern world, the space age, the universe itself. And he was heavy into numerology and the teachings of Madame Blavatsky and all the esoterics. And his music is wonderful. His music is just fantastic, beautiful, uplifting music. You really have to wrap your ear around it because it can be very harsh sometimes, but it's completely consistent. Everything he ever wrote or sang about was about the space age and outer space and the why we should be there and not here and how this planet is extremely limited. It's not going anywhere. It's just a backwater. The real glory is out there. And you can transcend this and go out there. His favorite saying was, if you came from nowhere here, how come you can't go from here to somewhere else? And his songs were fantastic, like We Travel the Spaceways, Next Stop Jupiter, Rocket Ship Number 9, Aurora Borealis. It just goes on and on and on. The guy probably had 1,000 compositions. And the entire thing stemmed from his very personal and very real encounter with space aliens. You can look it up. There's been a lot written about it. It's a really fascinating and very deep subject. Sun Ra, two different words. Sun Ra.
It reminds me a bit, I think we had a brief conversation about Sammy Hagar. Sammy Hagar, basically started his music sort of career with a UFO encounter. You know, um, I believe he was working as a sanitation, garbage man or something like that. And it was like, he went to bed. He was not, came, I think, from a broken home and everything. He was in, very sort of like poverty stricken. And then he had like this, I don't know if it was a dream or what have you, but he had an encounter with aliens or a UFO. And the next day he's just like, I'm going into music. And there you go. And he's absolutely adamant about that. And if you look
Right.
up his whatever his autobiography, it's all about, yeah, this is how I got started. It was because of this UFO. And
Yeah.
that's what it was. And that's it, and
Yeah.
he doesn't waver from it. And Sammy Hagar, to this day, if you go to his concert or whatever, if you ask him, I'm sure he'll just tell you, yep, they're real.
Sure. Well, that reminds me of another story. This is not UFO related, but kind of similar, esoteric. I was on tour with a band, and our road manager was this young lady. Um, and we spent a lot of time in the bus, and you're driving long distances and eventually get to know people and talk and just converse and whatnot. After a couple of weeks on the road with her, we're all comfortable with each other, and she told us the story of when she came face to face with a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, skunk ape, whatever you want to call it. And it's just got all the hallmarks that we've been talking about. She was driving on a road somewhere, came around the bend, and there was this thing, like either in the road or on the side of the road, but no mistaking what it was, no denying it. And she was driving, it was just her driving a car when she saw this thing. And she, got close enough to it to be scared out of her mind and, took off as fast as she could. But same deal. She's like, I saw this. I know what I saw. You're not going to tell me I didn't see it. It was there. I was here. I was scared to death of it. I took off. Well, you can't argue with that. You're going to tell her she's wrong. I wasn't going to do that. But it was really interesting to speak to somebody who had a very real experience like that and could relate it lucidly, calmly, rationally. She knew what she saw.
And that's basically it. It's like, how can you argue with that or try to like belittle them for the experience they saw or, encountered? And that's where, all these questions sort of arise. And it's like, what can it be? And I think a lot of people who had those experiences and encounters, they're chasing that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah,
And you can see that with, say Sun Ra, that one incident, or, your friend, who's in that band with, what it was, skunk ape, Sasquatch, Yeti, we don't know. Something that made a lasting impression.
yeah, totally. And isn't that understandable? I mean, if you had an experience like that, which is so far out of the normal and so bizarre, and so in her case frightening, of course you're going to remember that and be affected by it one way or another and want to know what the answers are. That's human nature.
One thing I've been meaning to ask you, Malcolm, and one of my favorite bands growing up was Devo.
Oh,
And I know I just unlocked the key right there, a big smile on your face, Devo. I always thought that they were like wearing like, I know those little imported, those flower pots and everything. I always thought there was like, what is this, like UFOs or something like that? Do you think they actually had any sort of like, strange encounter or anything, that led them, down their musical, careers, that kind of like, de-evolution, of man, I don't know if you could shed any light on that. Maybe a little bit sort of like vague, but that's where I'm.
no. I mean, if you want to know about Devo, you're talking to the right guy because I'm only mildly obsessed by that band. No, they have never once ever talked about an event like that. They were actually born from the Kent State shootings in 1970.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yes,
Wow.
the
So it
two
was out
leading
of
figures.
violence, wow, holy smoke.
Yeah, they were there for that, and that affected them, as you can imagine, much like a UFO sighting, affected them deeply and permanently. And so their theory was that any society that would kill their young like that was obviously not moving forward, but moving down. They were not evolving, they were devolving. And so that's where the whole theory of de-evolution started to come about. As far as the hats, those are energy domes, and they're designed to recycle energy that escapes from the occipital lobe in the back of the head and send it cascading back down through the body. So they are energy recyclers. That's the official explanation. And also allegedly built in direct proportion to ancient Aztec temples.
Ah,
So there is a connection to the esoteric there. Maybe not UFOs necessarily, but there's some esoterica there.
okay. We have some time for some questions if you have anything. And I think, Malcolm, you're probably pretty much open to anything.
Yeah, ask, as they used to say on the blogs, ask me anything. Ask me about Devo, and we'll be here all night. Just saying.
If you can, type in your questions into the chat.
If there aren't any questions, my feelings can't be hurt. I'm bulletproof. But I'm really glad we did this because you really you stimulated my memory and jogged my memory about Nelson Slater and Sun Ra and all these people who have connections to the esoteric, to the outer space, and who have made incredible music and great art as a result of it. You know, you could be a total skeptic and say, well, it's all BS and it doesn't exist. But, the results speak for themselves. I mean, Sun Ra left behind a colossal body of work, which people are still trying to decipher and study to this day based on his accounts of his encounter with an extraterrestrial. You know, Nelson Slater did the same thing, not to the same degree as Sun Ra, but that was an impetus for him to create and to make awesome music. So for that alone, I think it's worth studying this and trying to figure it out and learn what may or may not have happened, or just accept it at face value and enjoy the fruits of the encounters.
I agree. We don't have any questions, so we're gonna call it a night. And we thank everyone for joining us this evening. Stay tuned for this weekend. We have the wonderful, awesome Michael Schratt this Saturday. So if you haven't registered for that presentation, please do. Michael Schratt is hardcore UFO military aviation historian expert. He does his homework. He's a real hard hitter in the UFO community. And but then again, we have Malcolm Tent coming in and offering a different perspective this evening. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts for joining us this year. And we invite you to come back next year. If you have
I'd
any other
love to.
stories, thank you, Malcolm, and thank you, everyone. Until next time, until Saturday.